Some of the myths of armor, and here's examples how those myths are untrue.
It's about 50 pounds. Now, not quite the image of the stumbling fool attired in full armor who could hardly move, let alone get into the saddle of his horse, and where's my pulley or crane? Not quite, and it's obvious.
Axe, which is not possible for a sword to cut through armor. It simply cannot happen.
For it to be truly effective, a knight's armor has to allow the freedom of movement to match the swiftness of a lesser armored opponent on the battlefield. And also let a knight climb or mount a steed quickly. But the design cannot compromise on its protective capabilities, and it has to be able to withstand what is perhaps the pinnacle of medieval metallurgy, the longsword.
About 50 pounds.
All right, and here's some examples of other pieces. The armor is Filippo Negroli. His work is just beautiful. Ahead of his time, just the carving, the meticulous nature, and of course the sword. The categories of swords, the modern conception. Because looking at fight manuals, you have what's called just sword, or spada. It's hard to tell how long the sword is. Some fencing masters would describe how the sword needed to be a certain length here and there. Otherwise, towards like modern day, you'd have what's called a side sword, or the longsword, or the rapier. And where I hear this would be a longsword, it's a multi-purpose tool. You see right here, you got your spear portion to stab someone, your cutting, and your hammer. And of course, the misconception is people think the whole blade is sharpened. Not the case. This is the portion that would not be sharpened. There's really no point. The percussive force of the sword right here is what's going to kill your opponent. And as we saw earlier in the lecture where I'm cutting the tatami mat, I'm trying to hit that point of percussion. And what I mean by a hammer, the crossguard, is that you can pick up the sword like a hammer and strike someone. And this is, of course, where you have the two fighters in full plate. You see he's doing what's called hand and a half, where he's closing distance to try to either stab the opponent or pummel him. Or oftentimes it would turn into a wrestling match where it goes to the ground and it comes down to who pulls out their dagger to stab one another. And how we know how they fight, so the earliest form of fighting manual is what's called 133. It's about sword and buckler, as by monks. And of course, some historians argue these are women. So, and we see in the German tradition that women did learn how to use a sword in what's called the Feststuhl, which is a form of a tournament of swords for festivities and displaying martial prowess. There were female fighters. There was an account of a fencing master's wife who fought in one of the Feststuhls, did rather well, and that was that. So then the sources didn't make really a big deal about it. And right here we have from Fiore de Libre, who was a Italian fencing master. And the crown right here is to tell the reader who is supposed to win the exchange and what you're supposed to do. And of course, one of the popular weapons I mentioned earlier is the halberd. It's a heavy-duty weapon by means it can stab and it can chop. It has a huge percussive force, which of course infantry would use this to take down knights and other infantry. And of course the axe part, you want that raised up, so when one of those obnoxious knights decides to charge your formation and goes flying off the horse and you're catching that knight, it's not going to slide all the way down your weapon. It's to prevent the body from compromising your weapon. And just one more for the road. Here's an example of a full-plated knight wielding a mace, and there's other forms of weapon in the background, and once again, armor of the tilt for jousting. So some questions for this lecture. What are some of the motivations for waging war? What other causes and examples can you think of from prior readings? Because let's face it, this hour lecture I can't cover everything, but that's okay. I would like to hear what other causes of warfare you read from the class. And did your perception of ancient warfare change from listening to this lecture? I would like to know. You could tell me about maybe, oh, I didn't know that, or hey, ask me a question as if there's something I wasn't clear about. I'll be happy to explain. And who consolidated power because of warfare? I mentioned a few examples in the lecture. And, of course, do you believe Hollywood accurately portrays battles? Don't think too hard on this one. And, of course, please feel free to submit feedback and commentary. It will help me for my journey of becoming a professor and for my growth so that I can provide awesome lectures and content for my future classes and for your friends who eventually will take one of my future classes. I'm pretty determined to becoming a professor if you haven't picked up on that. But that being said, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much, and have an awesome day, and good luck with finals.